because of time, but the number is very huge of number of patients who will need admission, which are only 10% of the total patients. Uh, the first thing, mortality is low, 99% will come out safely. Secondly, out of the infected people, they will get immunity, and when more than 50% of the population gets infected, there will be what is called as herd immunity, which means herd is a collective. So if more than 50% of the population is infected and have acquired immunity in this particular disease, the rest will not get infected. So half the people will actually get infection and immunity, and the rest will actually be protected without getting any infection. This is something that happens with every epidemic actually, but the figures for this epidemic are a little different. Okay, so like swine flu, we will get over this epidemic on its own without any vaccine. Even if you don't get a vaccine, we will overcome this epidemic because natural immunity will really save us. In the meanwhile, there will be literally hundreds of thousands of illnesses, unwell patients, and hundreds and thousands of deaths. That is the problem. Okay. So the point is that out of those who get infection, 50% will have no symptoms at all. They will not even know that they had infection. Secondly, out of those who get infected, 25 less people who are like you, who are around less than 25, 30, they will not be affected at all. They will not get the illness. Out of the rest, so the number is shrinking as you can see. 80% will have mild illness, as you might have heard. Only 10% will have severe disease, and about 10% will require admission, and then 1% will die. So my point is, even if those 10% who have severe disease who require admission, it's a huge number, and unfortunately, our public health system is so bad, in such a bad shape because of privatization, that we don't have enough beds for these people. And that is the biggest challenge in coming some months. If we get this epidemic really going and we cannot stop it by whatever means, we can slow it down, reduce the number of cases, but we will have literally thousands of cases. Okay. And therefore, will only retard the speed of the disease. And hopefully, even summer will, all different kinds of scientists have said that summer will not, doesn't make any difference with the virus. Actually, it doesn't kill the virus. It takes about 65 degrees to kill the virus. But the droplets through which the virus spreads, these droplets will dry out in summer faster. Life will become less, and therefore, hopefully, it will have some effect on the speed with which it will come. Okay, so what we are expecting that there will be millions of cases in coming 2 months. We have three measures. One is social distancing, second is hand washing, and third is mask. If we use these methods very assiduously, then we will reduce the number of cases from millions to lakhs. That is what exactly we are trying to do. And lockdown is only an extreme form of social distancing. Like we have done here, not with great success, unfortunately, because in our society it is not possible. You also have to remember that South Africa, Ireland, Netherlands, these are the countries we have tamed the epidemic without lockdown because they have done social distancing, they have done very aggressively contacting and tracing the patients and their isolation. And if that we do much more rigorously, then we will not require a lockdown. But unfortunately, we have not been able to do it. And lockdown was some kind of an inevitability with great cost for the social well-being of many people. Okay. So even if we get a much good reduction of cases in this month, like May, April, May, it is likely that we'll get a jump in July and probably also in November. So let us not believe that this is only a matter of couple of months. The major attack is in coming month, but the whole thing will continue. Maybe a little mini spike or even a big spike in July and November. And therefore, all this will continue till half the population gets infection. Some people say 60%, some say 52%, some say 80%. There are different opinions. I go by this projection by one Professor Muligin, who has made certain assumptions. These are all assumptions, and I feel that hopefully that will be only a small number, which is 52%. So, and the vaccine will be available next year, and then this is how we will be able to tame the epidemic. It will not go. Swine flu, we continue to get cases. We had swine flu in 2009, and then we are very scared. All kinds of things happened in couple of years, and later on, gradually the number of cases declined, and now we keep getting cases of swine flu once in a while. Similarly, we'll keep getting cases of uh, COVID, but it will the explosive situation will not be there. Okay. Now, as you will be very familiar that I'm not dwelling upon it, but just to note that there will be increase in human rights violations during lockdown at home, within community, and by the state. I will not go into it, but this is something which we will, as socially conscious lawyer and citizens, guard against and try to fight it out. Now let us come down to the main issue of role of public health services. See, public health services has become kind of a bad word in middle class. It's considered low quality, it's only for the poor, etc., etc. But now, for a change, public health system has come into prominence, and therefore, let us see some basic elementary things about public health system. It has multiple functions. The first function is water sanitation, supplementary nutrition, vaccination, etc., etc. What we call public health measures. Second function is regulation of private sector. We will not touch it in this particular discussion. We'll also not touch on the basic function of public health function in this discussion. The third point is provision of healthcare citizens for poor citizens who do not have purchasing power. Now, this is the point which we are going to dwell upon a little bit now. Okay. In epidemic situation, provision of healthcare to citizens increases manifold. It's a very complex, nationwide, coordinated, and uniform health action which is needed with a large force of primary healthcare work. Now, all this is simply impossible with the private sector. The private sector is praised a lot, but we have to remember the limitation of the private sector. They do not have, for example, primary healthcare workers at all. We are literally thousands and lakhs of ashas working, Anganwadi tais working. We have all kinds of people being mobilized by the government, going from house to house, tracing contacts, ordering them around, quarantining them, isolating them, keeping them in isolation wards and treating them. All this must be done at free of charge, which is simply impossible in private sector. And therefore, the public health services has become very, very important, and we have now realized the importance of the public health services, which has been neglected. So we'll come to the main point that I want to make in this discussion, that last since 1980, because of the government's policy of privatization, our public health system has been emaciated. It was not so bad at all 40 years back when I was a young kid, freshly graduated from medical college. The public health system was never very good, but it was not as bad and as dilapidated and as dirty and as incompetent as it is today. Why this happened? Because there has been active and passive privatization since 1980. Uh, the most important point has been there has been no proportionate increase in the budget for healthcare, both because of rising population that we increase the budget, and secondly, we always had a low budget for public health system in India. And against the WHO recommendation, which you might have heard about, that 5% of the GDP should be spent on public health services, but India traditionally at independence was spending about only 0.5% of the GDP. Gradually, because of the Nehruvian kind of model, it increased to something like 1.8% by 1980, then declined to 1985 to 1.6%, and by 2019 it was 1.4% of GDP. So from increasing from let's say from 1.6%, 8%, 1.9% to 5%, it went on stagnating and declining, and it is today poor, absolutely poor, 1.4%. Now, therefore, the most important reform that we need today in the wake of COVID epidemic, that we must increase the public health budget substantially. There has to be a quantum jump. Secondly, what has happened is that there has been privatization of beginningly to begin with ancillary services like cleaning services, security, kitchen, catering, etc., etc. The core clinical services were not privatized, but they started with these kinds of privatization, which also affected very adversely the actual healthcare given to the patients. But that is one modality of privatization. Secondly, privatization of medical colleges also was quite bad. We started since 1980, and now more than half the medical colleges are privatized with huge amount of fees. And whosoever passes out of such medical colleges, when they spend 5 to 10 million rupees for the education, they are absolutely going to go into private practice and indulge into malpractice. There is no other way. And third stage has been privatization of laboratory and radiology services. Our primary health centers, our rural hospitals have these small laboratories. All those laboratories have been now by and large closed, and a centralized private laboratory has been given some kind of a contract to serve, which is again one form of privatization. Now, whatever is little that is left of the private healthcare system, public health system, uh, in CA, for example, in Maharashtra, we have 80% of the posts of postgraduate doctors in Maharashtra's healthcare services, especially in rural areas, even in urban areas, are absolutely vacant. So, to begin with, the number of posts that are declared are half of what are required because the government doesn't want to increase its responsibility. And secondly, out of those which are declared, 80% doctors are. Hello, I've been muted. Press Alt A to unmute.
No, we can hear you.
Hello.
We can hear you, sir.
Yeah,
You can
yeah.
continue.
I just finished in 5 minutes. Okay. So where were we? Yeah, we're talking about privatization and absolutely pathetic situation as far as the post of medical officers are concerned. So is the case of nurses, and the higher you go for postgraduate doctors, the more and more vacant posts and big gaps that we see. And now, lastly, the recent most step has been the proposal for privatization of district hospitals. So all these years, the clinical services were not directly privatized. They're whittled down from all sides, but actual services were not privatized. But now there is a proposal of privatizing the district hospitals as such, giving them away most of the facilities and only core facilities of primary healthcare being kept with the government. Now, this is absolutely sorry state of affairs. With these kinds of rickety system, we simply cannot manage an epidemic. Unfortunately, whichever staff is left, the government has really asked them to work hard. They are working double shift. They are risking their own safety, and they are really, in a sense, doing a marvelous job under duress, and somehow be able to cope up with the work so far. But see, if they get huge number of cases, you don't need to be an expert to say that the whole system will collapse. So the whole idea of social distancing is to basically prevent this collapse of public health services. So what kind of thing that we health activists have been demanding to the government? Firstly, absolutely important is that there has to be a quantum jump in government health expenses from 1.3% GDP and it is about 2% of the government budget to 8% of the government budget as recommended by Niti Aayog. If you go by Niti Aayog, actually Delhi government has increased to 12%. So it is not impossible for any determined government to increase its government budget for healthcare. You have to have political will, and this is the time to actually at least increase the budget twice as much as it is today. Okay. Secondly, 66% of the budget has to be reserved for primary health care and not for hospital care. It is the primary health care, the nurses and the grassroots level workers and the PHC doctor who will actually help majorly in containing the epidemic and caring for the patients. Okay. And for that, you will have immediately doubling of the healthcare staff at the primary level. Then will also require fulfillment of all vacant posts immediately. Just take the example in one single state called Maharashtra, there are 15,000 posts vacant today. 15,000. Last week, fortunately, the minister has now announced on television that kindly apply. We will sanction all these posts and we will fill the post. And within 72 hours, 15 more than 15,000 applications have come. So it is not impossible. It is certainly possible to increase the capacity. There are people who want to be ready to willing to work for the government health system, but government has not so far been very liberal about it. Now it's not only question of spending more money. The whole system is actually has been in a sense degenerated from within, because there is nepotism in the recruitment and promotion policy. There is no career advancement options that most doctors have. Like an MBBS doctor who starts as a medical officer, after 25 years, he will retire as a medical officer. Same scale. No avenue for advancement in 20 years. No, this unless you pass, of course, government examination and upgrade yourself, but not everybody can do that. So unless you make life more easy for the staff to work, like the doctors are expecting an increase in non-practicing allowance because they compare themselves with private doctors. Now, this is not exactly something I would appreciate, but this is the reality. So, if in private practice you are able to earn for whatever means, error foul, 4 times as much as you do in private government practice, then of course nobody will come to government service. So we require a drastic improvement in their salary allowances. Then they need good quarters, decent quarters, all, and of course good working conditions. There has to be some respect to expertise of doctors. So if bureaucrats and small clerks start ordering doctors around on petty administrative matters, is very irritating. And above all, safety for women workers. All these are absolutely required in the context of the COVID epidemic. All of them require personal protective equipment. You cannot expect them to risk their life. And of course, while protection from violence, and we need cooperation from the community. I think probably my time is up. Therefore, I will sort of skip this last point, which is transparent and democratic functioning. Let me tell you only one thing, that it's not only question of money, it is a question of work culture. The work culture is terribly bad in public health services. It's all ordering around hierarchical, top-down approach. There is no respect for the staff, whether it is a nurse, whether it is a doctor. It is all bureaucracy driven. It is all politician driven, and therefore the intense distress. I can tell you, so many people have confided with me and all of us on this issue. And unless the overall culture changes, we cannot expect a good amount of working public health system. We may just increase the size, increase the budget, and spend more money, but it will be spent inefficiently, because unless the working morale of the public health department improves, we just spending more money and appointing more people will, of course, absolutely essential, but is not enough. So with whatever little time that was available, maybe I'm sorry I crossed my time limit, but these are the major issues. As I said, it is only a very brief outline. So many issues are there, but maybe at some time later we can revisit those issues if any of you want to talk about it. Thank you.
Dr. Phadke, thank you so much for some very provocative analysis. I think the challenge has been that we have tried to squeeze in a lot of information, and I think just so that nobody feels that they're getting shortchanged in the process, is even for the participants. This is something we mentioned in the beginning. We will be doing more sessions around health, and some of the things that Dr. Phadke has shared, I think we will get an opportunity to go into them in depth. But of what you have shared, there's already a few questions that are lined up. We hope to put them to you in the next, after the speakers are done speaking. I'd like to now invite, thank you so much, Dr. Phadke. I'd now like to invite Chinu. Chinu, can you?
Uh,
Chinu?
so you will have to unmute yourself.
Or one of us can unmute him if he's. Has he been muted?
Yeah. No, he's unmuted. We cannot hear.
Yeah, he's unmuted.
No.
He's not muted. Unmuted.
But we can't hear.
Chino, we can't hear you for some reason. Chino, we can't hear you.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, Renu, we can hear you.
Okay, so Shinu is going to use my laptop.
Yeah.
Okay. Hello?
Yeah.
Can you hear me?
Yes, Chino.
Yeah, okay. Okay, just give me a minute. Yeah. Kranti, can I start?
Yes, please.
All right. I'm just trying to fix. Oh, now it's working in my device.
Can't hear.
Just one second, folks. Let's just find out. Chino, I think we've lost. Yeah, Chino.
Yeah. Go ahead. I see this. Yeah. Right.
Sorry, folks. Let's just give it a try and see if this is working out, or one of either Chino or Renu might have to restart their phone. Let's just check. Chino, are you speaking?
Yeah, I'm looking for my PowerPoint. Okay. All right. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. The topic of my presentation is pharma issues and public advocacy to PIA. Kranti?
Chino, we have Renu's screen up, and I think so. Are you using your computer to speak to us, or are you using Renu's computer to speak to us?
My computer.
All right. So then, do you have access to your PPT on Renu's computer?
I have access to it.
Yeah. Okay.
I'm going to leave this.
Yeah. All right. Got it.
I'm going to, yeah. Is it still on?
We still have gender. We have your PPT on. Renu.
Okay. I don't know how to get out of this now. Trying to get out of this.
No rush. No rush. We're good.
It's not happening.
Just 1 second. Let me
Yeah,
just,
okay.
yeah, is that better?
Now I see you. So Chino, you should put your
Yeah. Chino's is up.
Chino's is up.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Back in this computer.
Okay. The topic is pharma issues and public advocacy. And yeah. Kranti, can you hear?
Yes, we
You
can.
can see.
The only issue is there's a slight echo, but I think we'll work with that for now.
All right. This is talking about public interest litigation on drug pricing.
Check your message.
Kranti, please check your message.
So this CIL was launched in September 2003, and today is 2020, and it's about 17 years. And the status of the CIL is still on in the Supreme Court. And reasons for the delay is the reluctance of the government to take decisions that will hurt industry. So I'll just give you a brief idea of the issues. One is we produce a lot of medicines in this country.
Chino, can you ask Renu's mic to be shut off just for a second?
Renu's mic. Okay.
Yes, it is better now.
It's better?
No.
No.
Actually, there are two devices. That's why it's echoing.
It's better now.
One of the mic is to be shut off. I mean,
Hi, Chino. Hello. Hello. Can you guys hear me?
Yes, can you unmute
Yes.
Chino?
Yeah, Chino, we seem to be having an echo, and that's usually because you have two computers or two microphones next to each other. So is yours and Renu's microphone next to each other?
Yeah, can you hear?
Yeah, we still have, Renu, we still have the echo from whenever you're speaking.
So, I don't know what to do. No, you were going to share his slides, so he's going to put that on.
Yeah, all right, let's try that. I'll open the slide and I will share.
Yeah, can you hear me now?
Yeah. Now I think it's very
Hello?
clear. Yeah, now it's clear.
You share his slides.
Yeah, I'll do that. Just a second.
He will share the slides for you. So you can just talk.
Yeah, Kranti, can you put on my slides?
Yeah, right away. Just 1 second.
When he's talking with Kranti.
Yeah.
Yes. Perfect.
Is that better? Can you see the? Chino, just let me know when you want to change it. Yeah.
Hello.
Yeah. Can you?
Yes.
His slides are shared.
We can't hear you, Kranti. Can you hear us?
Yeah.
It's still echoing?
No, it's good.
No, not echoing. It's perfectly fine.
Hello?
No, no, it's not echoing. It's completely fine. But I don't think. One second.
Does anybody know what's happening? Like, what are you getting, Smithy?
I think maybe they are unmuted, so they can hear us.
Yeah.
They cannot hear us. That's the problem they're saying.
Oh, so you can hear. Okay. So Chinu, so you share the screen. We can't hear you. So share the screen and then Chinu will keep talking.
Okay, just a second more.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll start. Chinu, when you start speaking, I'll get the screen going.
Okay. You're putting the screen on.
It's up.
Wait, this thing go in. My slides went off. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. All right. How do I know he's hearing?
We're good.
Hello.
We're good. We're good.
All right. I'm going on as and just message me if that you're hearing me. And
Hello?
We can hear, and he can speaking, and every time he wants me to change the slide, just let him to say next. I'll move the slide. All of us.
Okay. You say next whenever you want him to change the slide. Yeah. Okay, bye.
all right. The basic issue in medicines in India is that our pharma industry is booming. It's making a lot of medicines, and the total sales in India is of something like 1 trillion rupees, domestic sales, and exports are under 1 trillion rupees. 1 trillion is about 1 lakh crore. Anyway, is 1.4 trillion actually. But the situation is that the medicines are not accessible, they're not affordable, and they're not available when it's required. And
It's unmuted now.
yeah,
Okay.
so there's a lot of overpricing, and so we have been demanding, and I say we, a bunch of civil society activists, All India Drug Action Network, Medico Friends Circle, Low Cost, and so on. We have been demanding that there should be price control. Price control is considered a very unfashionable thing in economics nowadays because it reminds people of socialism and communism and so on and so forth. In health, the major issues that in health the free market does not work. So the ideas of the free market, the market will change, the market will take care of everything, does not work in pharma market as well as in the health market. So we need regulation by the state. Regulation we need in the pharma industry by the state, as well as regulation of health services by the state. So our basic prayer in this petition was that we should have a price regulation of all the essential and life-saving drugs. And we went on, we filed this thing in 2003. I will skip all the details. by 2013, because of an ultimatum given by the presiding judge, the government came out with this drug price control order 2013. Next. Yes, thank you. So this slide shows what I just told you. This is our Indian pharma market is 1.42 trillion rupees, out of which only 16% is in the national list of essential medicines. Most of it is not. And the other thing about our medicines market is that at least about 25 to 30% of the market is irrational, unscientific medicines are there, and they need to be thrown out. And that has been the subject of another case of ours on fixed dose combinations. We won't have time to talk about it. So the solution to this is we need price control. We also need only rational drugs to be made in this country, and medicine should be accessible in government services everywhere whenever people need it. And as far as government services are concerned, medicine should be available free of cost. Next. Next. Yeah, I will skip this slide. Next. Now, I talked about market failure because the idea of free market does not work in pharma, which I already talked about. And therefore, we need state regulation. And next. Next, please. Yeah. Because the market has failed, there is a market failure, serious market failure in this pharma market. There are a lot of market distortions. And what do we mean by market distortions? Overpricing of medicines. The same medicine will sell at 1 rupee at one place in Bombay, and it'll sell at 10 rupees in a rural area. So, and then there are these marketing tactics, so-called marketing tactics of the pharma industry. They try to quote unquote persuade doctors into prescribing costlier brands by giving gifts, sending them on holidays to England or America or Singapore or wherever. And where does the pharma industry get money for all this? It is from you and me, because they will charge the drug high, they'll make higher profits, and then that money they use for sending the doctors on holidays and so on. So these are all unethical. We are all against it. We have been demanding that there should be a compulsory marketing code, etc. Next. Next, please. So generally people ask, like whether costlier brands of the same medicine are better. And this is the kind of impression which even doctors tend to promote. Like we in low cost produce some medicines. Now, I produce some medicine for, say, cholesterol at about, say, 20 rupees for 10 of 10. In the market, it was selling at 100 rupees. Then after price control, it came up to 60 rupees, but still it is overpriced. As we will show you in some of the other slides, the amount of profit made by pharma companies. So we are not against profit. When we say that we are not trying to be very extremist, radical, etc., etc., we think pharma companies should make profits. The profit should be reasonable. They should not profiteer. Next. So the answer to this question, aren't costlier medicines better? Costlier brands better? No. Because if everybody makes good quality medicines, medicine price has got nothing to do with quality. And we have proved it in low cost for the last 20, 40 years that you can make good quality medicines and sell at lower prices and still survive. Now, all this is the background. And so we have been fighting since 2003. Finally, we got there was one justice, I forget, Singhvi. He finally gave an ultimatum to the government. If you're going to drag your foot, I'm going to dictate with the help of the petitioners the drug price control order 2013. So the government got its act together and got out some kind of a drug price control order. So now the situation today is that about all the essential, as per the drug price control order, DPCO, all the medicines, life-saving, all the essential medicines in the DPC, in the national list of essential medicines, which is about 376 in number, these 376 drugs are under price control. But then it's also very funny because this National List of Essential Medicine mentions only, for example, they'll mention atorvastatin, as I'm telling you, which is a, let's take paracetamol, which is crocin. They are mentioned only paracetamol 500 mg. So what companies did is they started making paracetamol 600 mg. Now it's called Dola something, which is very popular. And then Glaxo made paracetamol 1000 mg. They call it paracetamol super or something, crocin super. So this is all unscientific, and you should not have so much of paracetamol in one tablet, etc. Actually, there is a well-known research group called Cochrane. They recommend only paracetamol 300 to 350 mg as the rational dose. Anyway, so what has happened is there is an escape hatch. The point is there is an escape hatch. When you prescribe only particular strength, they are left out all the other strengths. They left out also many useful life-saving drugs from the price control order. They also left out, members of the same therapeutic class. For example, they have one drug for asthma like salbutamol, but they left out montelukast, which is very costly. So these are the problems. Therefore, we have pointed out these problems in the Supreme Court, and the case is still going on. It is listed, as you all know, that as lawyers, Tariq par Tariq lagti hai, or it's going on. Let's see. We don't know. And this government is certainly not enthusiastic. Even the previous government was not enthusiastic in finishing this case because they will have to. They don't know if a good judge comes, he will give an order favorable to us. Anyway, next. That thing about cost-based pricing. See, this is how normally pricing is done. Like cost of the medicine plus whatever the cost of manufacture, labor, etc., and plus some profit. This is the common sense. Instead of using this common sense based way of fixing the maximum price, ceiling price, the government took out something called simple average price. That means they will take the retail prices of top selling brands with 1% market and take a simple average, and that will be the ceiling price. Now the problem with this simple average pricing is that already the brands are high priced. So if we take a simple average of high priced brands, so it'll still get a high priced maximum ceiling price. So that is a problem with this. So we are against this. We have said in the Supreme Court that next please. We are against the simple average formula. So that is where it stands. And I'll just go through, because of shortage of time, one or two tables. Next, please. See, this is the cost price I'm showing you from our price. This albendazole is for worms. It's 11 rupees per 10 tablets. That is what it costs us. And the ceiling price after the latest price control order is 69 rupees, which means it's about 6 times. Now take the second one, it is used for cardiovascular amlodipine. If we make it at 1 rupee 24 for 10 tablets, after the price control price is 22 rupees 80 paise. That means it's almost 2,000% more, which means they are making almost 2,000% margin. Even if you take out marketing costs, etc., there will be about 1,000% margin. So we are against this kind of irrational profiteering. And same thing I can show you with the atorvastatin, which is a very popular drug. Is 1, 2, 3, 4. The fourth row, it's 4 rupees. It costs us 4 rupees. And it was selling at 100 rupees before price control. Now it's become 49 rupees. Now it's 60 rupees, latest one. So, and that means about 1200% margin, and so on and so forth. Next, please. Next, please. Yeah, comparison with public procurement price. This shows again. This shows that how absurd the simple average selling price methodology is. For this first drug, imatinib, simple average selling price gives you about 2,962 rupees, whereas Rajasthan government's medical services corporation procured it at 29 rupees, which means that with the ceiling price after the DPCO 2013, it is about 10,000% more. So there's a profit margin of 10,000%. Now people don't believe this. I mean, when you say it in public, people think this guy is doesn't know his arithmetic or something, but this is a fact. So next, please. So this is the last slide. What needs to be done? And these are our demands still in the active in the Supreme Court, and the bench will have to deal with this whenever we have a hearing. We are saying that expand the list of drugs under price control to include other life-saving drugs, and they should the price control should be in all the strength and presentations, not only on one particular mg. If it is in, should not be only on 500 paracetamol 500 mg, should be on all strengths of paracetamol. And then say something called FDCs, fixed dose combinations, which I'm not going into, but we are saying that fixed dose combinations are essential drugs. Generally, fixed dose combinations have to be banned. The few fixed dose combinations are rational, they should be put under price control. That is our next demand, which is also a topic of another PIL. All irrational FDCs have to be banned. And there's a whole controversial, contentious issue of patented drugs pricing. We are saying that government should get a handle and issue compulsory license, which means they should take the license monopoly from the foreign company and give it to local companies so that the prices can come down. I'll stop here. There are other slides which I'm not going into for lack of time. And also because I cannot really hear you and really don't know whether you're able to hear me. Thank you very much.
Chinu, can you hear us now? Renu?
Yeah, can you?
Yeah, we could hear everything very, very clearly.
Okay.
Renu, so I think it's something to do with your phone, because as soon as your phone has come into the picture, we are getting the echo. We did not have the echo till now.
I will put this off, but I can't hear you. So I'm going to put off the phone and I'm going to ask you to use my slides.
Okay. My colleague was going to read them out, but two friends who are here who've already put their questions in, Abhishek and Rachna. I'm going to give you all the floor to ask your questions, and for the others, once you have asked your questions, I will add the others. Abhishek Srivastava. Abhishek. Joel, can you unmute Abhishek and Rachna, please?
He's unmuted.
Yeah, Abhishek. Till Abhishek, till we figure out with Abhishek, is Rachna there?
No, Rachna has left.
Okay, so Joel, can you ask Rachna's question? Do you have it? All right, till Abhishek gets his voice, just a few questions. Dr. Phadke, there's a question to you. Are you proposing a major health policy revision in regard to manpower? And what about underpaid frontline workers? One. Two, the question to you, Renu, that the COVID-19 pandemic has brought to fore once again how the frontline health workers are largely women and the decision-making state administration overwhelmingly male. Would COVID-19 push women further into danger with accountability? A question to all three panelists: is India capable of addressing the mental health issues stemming from the pandemic through its public health mechanism? And this, if anybody else has questions, can they please put them into the chat box, or we'll open the floor for the panelists to respond to this question. And there's also another question from Rajni. What is your opinion about the COVID-19 private lab testing, Supreme Court order and subsequent modification order? The first order where they said that even private labs should provide it for free, and the subsequent modification where they said only if under the particular scheme of the government. And a build-up, do we believe of addressing this pandemic, or will the government have to sequester the private sector? These were the 6 questions that have come in. While we listen to you, we'll see a few more questions coming. Who wants to go first? Renu, would you like to go first?
I didn't actually hear all the questions. There
The-
was something about mental health.
Yeah. So
What was the question about mental health?
Can I answer that? Not mental health, the first question. Yes, the frontline workers are the least valued and least paid, predominantly women, and therefore there is a risk of continued, in a sense, I won't call it exploitation, but whatever, operation of these frontline workers. And I hope that there is not much further burden on them. In the initial stages, tracing the patients or the relatives or contacts is a big job, and they will have to keep doing it. And therefore, their facilities have to be provided. Extra allowance has to be given for the travel, the extra work that they do. My only point is that they do not require, in my opinion, I've talked to a couple of experts, they do not require N95 mask. Because when you go to home, by and large, they stay outside the room and you don't have to meet the patient at all. You just make inquiry about that person's whereabouts, where the person had gone, whom he met, what, which date, etc., etc. All this can be had without actually meeting the patient. Some relative within the house can very well give the answers. And then there is a form which has been filled in, which educated people can always give. So there is no direct exposure to the patient where you are going to be, go and interview. You don't have to interview the patient. You can seek information from the relative. And therefore, surgical mask is a must. And because surgical mask, I'm sorry, but even surgical mask is not a must. Ordinary mask, because the person who gives answers, who may be a relative of the patient, would wear a mask. The health worker will wear a mask. They will maintain a distance of whatever, 6 feet, and they just collect information and come back. So I suppose the other aspects of extra work, then extra, and of course vulnerability of going to the places where they are not welcome. There is so much of ignorance and so much of fear within the communities about health workers coming and going. So all these are, I think, more important risks compared to the risk of actually getting this COVID infection. So I think we should focus more on these aspects rather than the whole talk about PPE. Because PPE in this particular case basically means a mask, which they should be given at least 2 to 3 sets, which they can use every day and wash them off properly and use the next day. So I think that is what I feel about the frontline workers.
Renu, the question, yes. In addition to that, the second question vis-a-vis gender was that the frontline workers in the health sector, which is predominantly female, is disproportionately decisions are taken by the upper echelons, which is predominantly male. So what is your assessment? While it's come out in your presentation, but I think the question from the participant was, do you believe that the present pandemic will push the women frontline workers in a far more vulnerable situation than before? The second question, which was for all the speakers, was whether the present public health system is adequately equipped infrastructure-wise to handle the pandemic, or would it need to sequester the private sector, and at what point of time?
Okay, so with respect to that question on these power hierarchies within the health system, my point simply is that this pandemic will further heighten those power inequalities. So 2 things can happen. One is that these power inequalities can be further heightened and women workers can be, further sort of exploited within the health system. The other point can be that this can be an opportunity actually for bringing about that cultural change that Anand Phadke was talking about. That this is such a serious sort of a problem that all of us need to come together. So this can be seen as an opportunity for actually building teams, for actually promoting that team feeling and a sense of solidarity and camaraderie. So, I mean, I don't know. I think visionary leadership would probably do that. And I see that in Kerala, for instance, the reports which are coming in from Kerala are so encouraging, because some of what I'm talking about actually can be seen over there. Women nurses are part of the team, equal part of the team, and the way it has all been set up, there are sort of burnout prevention programs, there is stress release programs for all of these workers. And so those are the sort of things that we need to encourage and foster at this point in time. That would be my response. I can't hear you, Kranti.
Sorry. Is that clear? Yeah, Abhishek, while you ask your question, I just wanted to add one more question. Renu, thank you for the pointing towards care model that we should see. One of the questions that is also coming from the participants is, when we are looking at when there is a strong push for privatizing whatever remains of the public health system on one end, and what are the other models globally on public health systems that we can look at and study and inform ourselves about, that look at a stronger primary response on the health front? Would you all reflect on some of these health systems globally that we can look at? Abhishek, your question.
As far as
Yeah,
I'm
can I?
concerned, I do not know what has been the global response at primary care level. I suppose we have closer home the Kerala response, I think, which is good, and with whatever limitations, I think that gives us much more lessons relevant to Indian conditions compared to any global responses anywhere, specifically related to COVID-19. I'm not aware of kinds of responses which we can emulate. But Kerala is a good example. We can learn from Kerala much more directly.
I think the question was also about other health systems. So I think maybe if you have future sessions or some readings we have, I recently saw a paper from a good friend of ours, and in which he has tried to describe the health systems of Vietnam, Malaysia, and I think Malaysia and some other neighboring country, Korea, which are very good and where we can have a lot of things to learn. And we of course know that Scandinavian countries and Canada, for instance, has a very good health system, where unlike its neighbor USA. Even the British health system by and large has been good, but they have been trying to sort of wreck it by this successive conservative governments and so on. But yes, so these are some of the examples which we can certainly learn. And within our country, Kerala and Tamil Nadu are, I think, outstanding examples. Tamil Nadu, maybe some people may raise some this thing, but I think by and large, things work in Tamil Nadu and Kerala. And so these are things to be copied, at least. Yeah.
Abhishek, your turn to ask your question.
Right, thank you. Yeah, so basically what I wanted to ask was, especially after Dr. Phadke's presentation, was around, and my question stems from my recent experience of working on the sexual reproductive health services in rural Jharkhand and Rajasthan, where and that sort of also gives me a sense of this, of how public health system is being delivered and administered. While you're absolutely right that it is highly top down, both the planning and administration, but what, like, also a huge challenge that I saw, that and also you sort of suggested that that the sensitization and awareness and demand does not really exist. And even like if people at the grassroots level, if they have resources, they also feel more confident about private health system rather than depending on public health system. So how does one address that challenge?
The overall public health system, as far as the treatment part is concerned, has been generally insensitive, sparse, without much good quality. Especially dialogue-wise, it is very deficient in many places, and therefore people have developed some kind of a faith in the private system. But overall, private system in India especially is irrational, is exploitative. Many people are happy about it, and by and large, not very rational. So I suppose the solution is not private versus public. It has to be a rational private system under the guidelines of standard treatment guidelines, and the public health system, which is free but has to become much more sensitive and much more accessible. It's not private versus public. I don't mean that you are putting it that way, but the issue is actually availability of healthcare in a sensitive manner without payment being a barrier. Whether it is public or private is secondary. And I would of course give, I would as a public health person, I would always give priority to public health system improvement and strengthening, which is far more easier to control, far more in tune with standard treatment guidelines compared to irrational private practitioners, because by and large, many of them are irrational and exploitative. And their livelihood depends upon this exploitation and irrationality. It's not that they have a choice. Especially the newer generation, having spent 5 to 10 million on their education, they are bound to get into irrational and exploitative practices.
So I just wanted to say that it has been found that where public sector actually is performing well, people prefer to go to the public sector. We've been working in tribal areas of Gujarat for a number of years, and we have seen that the community response, if there's a good doctor in the primary health center or the community health center, people prefer to go there than to the private sector. So I think the answer really is a responsive public health system will actually go a long way to increasing demand for services. And of course, there are these problems which many of us have been dealing with over the years, over decades actually, of people demanding irrational saline, bottle chahiye, injection chahiye, the miracle cures. So that is there, and that I think is a fallout of, medicalization, irrational sort of medicalization in the health sector. And that has to be combated, at another level. So I think your question about community demand, and the other point that I wanted to make was that the village health and sanitation committees in the health system are the first sort of space for democratic functioning and for increasing demand. And unfortunately, they are not, they are, the way it's all set up, they are designed not to deliver. So the concept was very, very radical actually, and was very promising, but it's in very few places that the village health and sanitation committees, the Rogi Kalyan committees are allowed to function the way they were meant to be, the way they were designed to function. So I don't know whether I've answered your question, but these were my responses to the question.
We're getting...
Yeah, that answers. Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah.
There was one more question on yesterday's order from the Supreme Court. I mean, they had made a what do you call it, volte-face?
Yeah, volte-face.
Yeah, in the sense that the previous order last week, they said that the government should give everybody in this country should get free testing, COVID testing, and they should not have anything to pay. Now, in this order yesterday, they've changed their mind, and the government lawyers have seem to have convinced the judges, in the sense that now they are saying that the judges are saying that our previous order never intended to make it free for all. We only meant free for only those who are already part of the Ayush healthcare system, the Ayushman Bharat healthcare system. So he says that will come to about some 10 crore people, 10 crore families are being covered under that. So there are about 50 crore people will be covered under this. So, which basically they let off the private sector. And also the government has very conveniently fixed a capped kind of a price for this COVID testing. It's about 4,000 rupees. Now, it is very disputable whether they have done any proper costing of the test. They said 4,000. So now all these private labs can charge up to 4,000 to anybody comes. Now imagine, suppose a family of 4 or 5, even the middle class family, will I spend 4 into 4, 16,000? I will rather go to the nearest government hospital, even if it's 100 kilometers away, and get medical COVID testing. So in a way, I think the judgment was bad, but the judgment in a way it was very good also, because the government had no political will. What is the point of having a radical judgment? Everybody should get free care without any political will for the government to implement it. So in a way, it's good now. The private sector is out, but everybody, including middle class people, will find getting tested from private sector unaffordable. Only very rich people can afford it. And also possibly there is also danger of private sector indulging in irrational COVID testing for anybody and everybody. So that is now stopped. So there are good points and bad points about the decision yesterday.
Philip, are you carrying Rachna's question still? Would you like to ask it?
Yeah, I'm asking a question. I think one of them is dealt here. One of the questions with regard to ART medicines. So one was when trans persons. So there's been a concern where 2 trans persons who came from Delhi were then detained in Telangana for 2 or 3 days. But then the thing is that all of their phones and any medium of communication that they had outside was being taken away from them, sort of a thing. And this again being a case not just with trans persons, but I think with a lot of persons who have cut themselves off from their family, which is much more of a case with persons with alternate sexuality and genders being the case, because now a lot of people are depending on their family for touching base and to sort of being in touch. But what happens when people who have cut off from their family are then being, I can hear myself for some reason. People who've been cut off from their family are being detained, are being put under quarantine and not being allowed to contact with anybody with the outside community, right? Then similarly, because one can't reach out to their chosen family, so as to say, again, the amount of stress levels and everything anxiety keeps increasing amongst people who are under quarantine. And that again leading to issues with regard to various mental health conditions. And then the government, the state which is already very poorly reflecting on dealing with mental health conditions, is again going into exacerbating mental health conditions. People by under quarantine and not allowing them any kind of counseling, emotional support, sort of a thing. The third question, and now hormone therapy is being shut suddenly, because one is you're not allowed to step outside to get hormones, and in the similar fashion, then there are with trans women, it's still an oral consumption of hormones, but in some cases you might need to inject estrogen, but in most cases it's oral consumption. But with trans men, you have to inject testosterone. So there are no persons who are to inject testosterone for trans persons, and that again being a break. And then the continuing thing was of the ART being provided. So one of the things which Rachna, one of Rachna's friends was doing in Hyderabad was taking medicines from the state and delivering them to PLHIV, to persons with HIV. But what the state then did was the state had refused to pay money even for fuel to go and deliver these. So
would
the
any
state then partnering with organizations also not working out because the state has been refusing to give them any sort of an advance to provide medicine and sort of do a home delivery of sorts. Hello?
Yeah, Philip, we got your questions. Do any of those panelists want to respond to that, or can I just come up with a quick? The Bombay High Court, we've had after the COVID, when the lockdown was announced, in Maharashtra, you only have 2 centers where third line ART is available. You need to travel from your districts to Mumbai to access third line ART. The matter came to the High Court. The High Court passed an order asking the collectors to look into it. And what is now put into place is that third line ART is now going to be available at the district. This is 2 weeks back. Third line ART is now available at the districts. The government has managed to decentralize the dispensing of ART medication. And what we have been given to understand is that the civil hospital, which is dispensing with ART medication, is now delivering the medicines to positive persons at their home. I think we'll have to do some sort of a similar strategy for those who are seeking access to either oral or injectable hormone, especially those planning to undergo an SRS in the near future. Philip, we'll need to identify people who need support like that, and then look up what kind of cases we can do. I am not one for closing a conversation, especially not a conversation in which, as a youngish lawyer, I wanted to say young lawyer, but I will just say youngish lawyer, who litigated health issues for a couple of years. I just want to say that all 3 speakers did some very, very fundamental provocations. Some of the issues that they have raised today, for all 3 speakers, from the public health system, from access to medication, from horizontal values that need to impregnate the system through and through, it was like a crash course. I am very confident that we will have another session on health in the coming week. We'll work with our speakers again about what dates work for them. For all the participants, whoever has some questions that we may not be able to take because we've gone into an hour and 45 minutes, which is way beyond a schedule of an hour. Please feel free to put your questions down. We will have some of our speakers for the following sessions. Please leave your email IDs and phone numbers down so that we can get in touch. We can forward you the recommended readings that they have suggested, and also a recording of today's session, and also updates about future sessions. But to each speaker who bore with us of our learning about how to use Zoom and all the chaos that happened in the middle, we apologize to them. We apologize to all the participants who had to deal with quite a bit of that for nearly 10 minutes. But thank you so much. I was just checking with my co-host. We haven't seen a number drop in spite of the fact that we were struggling with some of our systems. Usually, I encourage everybody to switch on their cameras so we can say hello to each other just as we are going. We decided to do this at the end because my colleague said that if you switch on the cameras because of the bandwidth, the system will crash. So I was like, okay, let's do it at the fag end so that if it crashes, we know we are saying bye.
Suggestion.